He saved France, then destroyed it. Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon's ego cost France everything. France after revolution, chaos, blood, fear. Young Napoleon. Insecurity, anger, ambition. Early victories in Italy. First signs of ego. France begins to worship him. Coup of 799. Crown steals power from people. Self-coronation. Ego versus republic. France silently loses freedom. Endless wars. Millions dead. Europe burns for one man's pride. Family placed on thrones. France starts bleeding economically. Guerrilla warfare. First major failure. Napoleon refuses reality. Ego blinds strategy. March to Moscow. Winter, starvation, death. 600,000 soldiers, almost none return. France broken forever. Exile. Return. Waterloo. Final humiliation. France left weak, bankrupt, traumatized. France didn't fall in a single battle. It fell inside one man's mind. They remember Napoleon Bonaparte as a hero, a genius, a savior of France. But history rarely asks the hardest question. What if Napoleon's greatest enemy was his own ego? This is not the story of his victories. This is the story of the price France paid for one man's pride. France was bleeding. The revolution had promised freedom, but delivered chaos. Kings were dead. Churches were burned. Trust was gone. Every year brought a new government. Every government brought new fear. France didn't want a king anymore, but secretly, it wanted order, and that is when Napoleon arrived. Napoleon Bonaparte was not born powerful. He was short, poor, Corsican, not real French, mocked by nobles. He learned early. Respect is taken, not given, while others dreamed of freedom. Napoleon dreamed of control. Every insult fueled him. Every rejection sharpened his hunger. By the time France noticed him, he was already dangerous. In Italy, Napoleon didn't just win. He humiliated Europe. Armies twice his size collapsed. Kings panicked. Soldiers worshipped him. For the first time in his life, Napoleon felt something new. I am destined. This was the moment his ego stopped growing and began ruling him. France applauded. They didn't realize they were feeding a monster. France no longer trusted politicians, but they trusted Napoleon. And Napoleon knew it. He didn't overthrow France by force. France handed itself to him. And in that moment, the Republic quietly began to die. Power didn't corrupt Napoleon. It revealed him. The French Revolution was supposed to end tyranny. No kings, no crowns, no masters. Yet history is cruelly ironic, because only 10 years later, France would kneel again. Not to a royal bloodline, but to one man's ambition. Napoleon Bonaparte did not destroy the revolution with violence. He did something far more dangerous. He convinced France that only he could save it. By 1799, France was exhausted. The government, called the Directory, was corrupt, weak, divided, hated by the people. Prices were rising. Soldiers were unpaid. Enemies surrounded France. The people didn't ask, who should rule us? They asked, who can protect us? And one name echoed everywhere, Napoleon. The generals feared him. The politicians needed him. The people admired him. Napoleon saw his moment. And like all men driven by ego, he did not hesitate. On November 9th, 1799, Napoleon committed treason. Not openly, not brutally, but politely. He walked into the government halls claiming, France is in danger. And everyone believed him. Soldiers surrounded the parliament. Lawmakers panicked. The Constitution collapsed. By the end of the day, the Republic was gone, and Napoleon stood above the ruins. He didn't call himself king. He chose a smarter title. first consul. Temporary, necessary, harmless, or so it seemed. But power had tasted too good. Napoleon pretended to be humble. He spoke of stability, order, the will of the people. But behind closed doors, he said something terrifying. I am the revolution. This was the moment France made its biggest mistake. They believed one man could replace a nation. Napoleon rewrote laws, controlled the press, silenced critics, and France applauded, because peace felt better than freedom, the crown that betrayed everything. 1:20, 1:28. In 1804, Napoleon made his true desire clear. France would have an emperor again. Not because the people demanded it, but because Napoleon's ego required it. Inside Notre Dame Cathedral, history was humiliated. The Pope stood ready to crown him. Napoleon took the crown from the Pope's hands and crowned himself. In that single act, he declared, I answer to no God. I answer to no people. I answer only to myself. The revolution died that day, quietly, politely, applauded by crowds who didn't realize what they lost. At first it worked. Roads were built. Laws were organized. France felt strong again. But strength came at a price. Endless conscription, total censorship, absolute loyalty. France was no longer a nation. It was an army. Napoleon was addicted to war because peace made him ordinary. And ego cannot survive being ordinary. Napoleon now ruled most of Europe. But inside his mind, something dangerous grew. If I stop, I fall. He could no longer retreat, could no longer compromise, could no longer admit mistakes. Every battle had to be won. Every enemy humiliated, every doubt crushed. France had traded a king for a conqueror, and the worst was yet to come. Napoleon had conquered Europe. This is where Napoleon stops fighting for France, and France starts dying for Napoleon. When ego replaces strategy, there was a time when Napoleon fought to defend France. That time was over. Now war was no longer a necessity. It was a habit, a hunger, an addiction. And like all addictions, it demanded more. More enemies, more blood, more sacrifice. France had crowned a man who could not live without conflict. Napoleon didn't just defeat nations. He humiliated them. Austria collapsed. Prussia shattered. Kings fled in the night. Every victory fed his belief. I cannot be defeated. But Europe learned something important. Napoleon was not fighting for France anymore. He was fighting for himself. And ego creates enemies faster than armies. Coalitions rose again and again, not because they loved each other, but because they feared him. Napoleon needed soldiers. France gave him sons. Entire generations vanished into uniforms. Villages lost their youth. Farms lost their workers. Families lost their future. The empire demanded loyalty. Refusal meant prison. Doubt meant silence. Criticism meant disappearance. France no longer asked, "Why are we fighting?" They only asked, "When will it end?" Napoleon never answered. Napoleon trusted no one, except his blood. He placed his brothers and sisters on thrones. Spain, Holland, Naples, Westphalia. They were not leaders. They were symbols of his ego. Europe didn't see reform. They saw occupation, and hatred began to grow, quietly. Unable to defeat Britain at sea, Napoleon tried something else. He declared economic war. All of Europe would stop trading with Britain. It sounded powerful. It was disastrous. Smuggling exploded. Prices soared. French merchants suffered. Napoleon refused to admit failure. Because ego cannot accept limits, France began bleeding, not on battlefields, but in markets and homes. For the first time, Napoleon began losing slowly, not battles, loyalty. Soldiers were tired. Generals were afraid to speak. Allies secretly plotted. Napoleon heard none of it. because he only listened to victory, and when victory stopped coming easily, he chose the worst possible response: more war. Napoleon believed he could rule Europe like an empire, but he forgot one thing: nations don't submit forever, and in Spain resistance would teach him a lesson, written in blood. We're now entering the moment Napoleon could have stopped, but didn't. This is where genius meets reality, and ego refuses to listen. The war Napoleon could not understand. Napoleon knew how to defeat armies. He knew how to break kings. But Spain was something he had never faced before. There were no battle lines, no surrender ceremonies, no final victories, only hatred. And hatred does not march in formation. Napoleon believed Spain would be easy. He replaced the Spanish king with his brother. No referendum, no consent, no respect. Spain didn't rise like an army. It rose like a people. Farmers became fighters. Priests became leaders. Villages became traps. Napoleon called them bandits. History would call them something else: guerrillas. French soldiers disappeared in forests. Supply lines were slaughtered. Roads became graveyards. Every victory meant nothing, because the enemy never stopped. Napoleon sent more troops. Spain swallowed them. This war gave Europe a new idea. Napoleon can be resisted. French reprisals were merciless. Executions, burned villages, collective punishment. Napoleon believed fear would restore order. Instead, it forged rebellion. Spain didn't submit, it bled. And bleeding nations don't forget. Britain saw opportunity. They sent money, weapons, and one careful general, Arthur Wellesley, later known as the Duke of Wellington. Napoleon ignored him. That mistake would return at Waterloo. Spain drained France. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, billions in treasure, endless morale. Napoleon called it a distraction. In truth, it was the beginning of the end. But ego does not retreat. It doubles down, and Napoleon had already chosen his next obsession: Russia. Spain taught Napoleon he was not invincible. But instead of stopping, he chose the greatest gamble in military history: a march east, into winter, into death. 600,000 soldiers march in. Fire, starvation, winter. France is broken forever. When ambition marched into winter, in 1812, Napoleon did something no man in Europe dared to imagine. He invaded Russia, not with courage, with arrogance. Over 600,000 soldiers marched east. Frenchmen, Germans, Poles, Italians, an empire in uniform. Napoleon believed numbers meant destiny. Russia believed in patience. Napoleon expected battles. Russia gave him emptiness. The Russian army retreated. Villages were burned. Food destroyed. Wells poisoned. Napoleon advanced and found nothing to conquer. Every step forward stretched supply lines. Every mile weakened France. But ego whispered, just one more victory. Napoleon reached Moscow. The city was abandoned. Then it burned. Flames consumed his victory. No surrender, no peace treaty, no celebration. Napoleon waited. For weeks, Russia waited longer. Winter arrived. Cold devoured men. Horses froze standing. Soldiers starved beside full cannons. Discipline collapsed. The Grande Armée became refugees. Russian attacks never stopped. By the time Napoleon escaped, less than 100,000 survived. France would never recover. Entire generations were gone. Napoleon did not apologize. He did not accept blame. He blamed generals, weather, betrayal, never himself. France was exhausted. Napoleon prepared for more war. Russia didn't just defeat Napoleon's army, it exposed the truth. He was not invincible, and now Europe was coming for him. What Napoleon left behind, after Russia, the myth was broken. Europe no longer feared Napoleon. They hunted him. Austria, Prussia, Russia, Britain. Enemies who once fought separately now fought together. Napoleon still believed genius could save him. France no longer believed. France was empty. Fields had no sons. Cities had no hope. Treasuries had no gold. Conscription notices arrived again. This time, people resisted. Napoleon demanded loyalty. France demanded rest. For the first time, he stood alone. In 1814, Paris fell. Napoleon abdicated. The man who crowned himself emperor was exiled to Elba, a small island, a small throne, a small audience. But ego does not shrink easily. Napoleon escaped. France welcomed him again. Not with hope, with nostalgia. The 100 Days began. Europe did not hesitate. They marched immediately. They would not repeat their mistake. At Waterloo, Napoleon faced Wellington. Rain slowed his artillery. Orders came late. Confidence came too early. This time, genius failed. The battlefield decided what ego never could. Napoleon was finished. Exiled again, this time far away. No armies, no applause, no excuses. On St. Helena, Napoleon spoke endlessly. About his greatness, rarely about France. That tells us everything. France lost. Millions of lives. A generation of men. Economic dominance. Political stability. Europe rebuilt. France recovered slowly. Napoleon left legends. France paid reality. Napoleon was not a monster. He was worse. He was human. Brilliant. Ambitious. Unstoppable. And unable to stop himself. France did not fall because Napoleon failed. France fell because he refused to end. History doesn't fear ambition. It fears ego without limits. And France learned that lesson the hard way.